Hello everyone. Today we're going to look at asanas, postures, and what should we feel in those postures. So sometimes it's quite hard because yoga used to be taught one-on-one, and nowadays we enter yoga classes when it's a big group, sometimes 5, 10, 15, 30, 40, 80. So it's quite hard to personalize classes, and sometimes what the teacher has planned out for you might not be working for you. So it takes some time and practice to get to know your body and the postures of what you should be feeling in them. So you can't break down all the postures because otherwise it would take forever. But you can categorize postures. So today we're going to look at standing postures mainly, and we're going to look at the families of Warrior 1 and Warrior 2 families. So both of the postures will have characteristics that makes them very similar. So you can kind of gauge how you should be practicing those postures. So that's what we're going to look at today. So just take a moment and we shall be on our mat in a second. Alright, so we are going to look at Warrior 1 and Warrior 2. So what is the main difference in between the two postures? So let's look at Warrior 1. Warrior 1 is a kind of a short posture. If you look down, your feet should be around hip distance apart. So if you have lines on your mat, you can always put your front leg to your right hand side, if it's the right leg, and the back leg slightly to the left hand side. So your hips can slowly start to square to the front. So what is squaring to the front? So if you would put your fingers on your hips, where you can feel the hips, you have fingers pointing forward. So if you want to square the hips forward, the fingers start to point forward to the front of your mat. Now it doesn't mean that you have to be perfectly squared to the front. It might be slightly to the side, maybe a bit more, because it depends on the anatomy of your hips. But to be able to square forward, you might have to shorten the stand. So if you want to come to Warrior 1 in a very long stand, it's not really going to help, not really going to happen. So I would recommend to have a smaller or shorter Warrior 1. So it's easier to square the hips forward. And again, feet are not in line, they are at least hip distance apart, because otherwise how can you expect the pelvis to level up? So this is the main characteristic of your Warrior 1. There's obviously a lot of other things that you have to watch out for, but we're going to look at the hips today so we can categorize postures. So where else do you hear that the teacher cues you to square off the hips or scissor the thighs together? So the scissoring action is pulling the front leg back, pulling the front back leg forward. So like causing a pair of scissors. Where else can you find that action? I will help you out, obviously. So one of those postures could be Warrior 3. Because in Warrior 3, if you let your hips open, it goes into more like a half moon. It's more like a Warrior 2 hips, which we're going to be talking in a second. So you want to square the hips down. So again, if you have your fingers are kind of pointing down. Obviously, there will be ranges slightly to the side or further down to the ground. But you're looking for that square hips. Where else do you have square hips? Thinking about pyramid. Again, legs are hip distance apart, trying to go forward and down. Now pyramid, your back heel can be off, back heel can be down in an angle. But again, if your feet in line, it will be impossible to square the hips. You want to have your feet kind of hip distance apart and trying to square the hip down to the ground to find this squareness. So these are 3 examples of Warrior 1 hips. So what is Warrior 2 hips? So for Warrior 2 is already a longer posture. That if your feet are in line or slightly out of line, no problem. It doesn't have to be perfect. But instead of now the hips pointing forward, the hips are going to point to the side. So it's open hips, we call it. Obviously, it doesn't mean it's perfectly facing to the side. What's easier to think of, instead of facing your hips, you can think about your torso facing to the side, because the hips will move with them unless you forget to take it with it. So why Warrior 2 is much longer? Because you add the hip distance. So you're coming from Warrior 1, you add the distance, how wide is your hip, to the distance between your feet, to be able to have a nice long lunge. Now in Warrior 2, you have internal rotation of your back leg and external rotation of the front leg. So ideally you're trying to aim your right knee pointing out to the right hand side. But again, because of hip compression, not all of us are going to have a perfect hips pointing to the side and knees pointing out to the right. Even my knees knocking in. So you can always make it shorter, you can always make it longer, but try to open the hips out to the side and direct your right knee forward and out. Feel the right leg working, quads, groin, stretching and strengthening, and putting the weight forward, and at the same time pressing down through the left leg. So Warrior 2s are open hips. What other posture you can think about Warrior 2 hips? Very simple, side angle, Asana, or going forward to your half moon, opening the hips, reaching the hands high up. You can thinking about Trikonasana. So Trikonasana is the jolly joker, because Trikonasana, some people practice it with open hips, going down and forward, but you can practice it with closed hips. Then you might be able to go down further and spiral the chest open a bit more. Personally, I practice Trikonasana closed hips, so Warrior 1 hips. But some people will teach it for you in Warrior 2 hips, so open hips. So it's really something that you have to suss out for yourself, or you have to ask a teacher's help to see how your hips are moving and what do you feel. So every posture you practice, just think, what do I feel? Can I feel a stretch? Can I feel loading on the joints? Does it feel right? Do I hurt my knees? Do I hurt my elbows? Every posture you take, you should be focusing on that it should not hurt you. You should not be able to injure yourself in yoga. You only injure yourself if you push yourself into somewhere where you're not ready to go yet, or if you're forcing yourself into somewhere where your body doesn't want to go to. So you have to get to know your anatomy and your body. For that, you have to pay attention. So pay attention to what you feel in postures. Try to think about where you should be heading to, where the energy leads to. So you can think about already now the open and closed hips. For example, more closed hips, you can thinking about revolved type triangle, squaring the hips and opening. Revolved half moon, which is my least favorite posture, I'm not gonna lie, opening the chest, lifting up. There are many postures where you require this square hips. And I recommend you to watch for one thing at a time until you learn the postures. So you learn maybe that, oh, I can find my hips squaring again. Then let's focus on the hips, scissoring the thighs together, lengthening through the torso, trying to find that strength around the legs first. And then later on, we can look at hands, arms, toes, fingers, feet, gaze, so many other things. So hopefully this helps you a little, the categorization of postures. I'm going to put up a slide where you can see a few examples of open and closed hips, so you can think about where you should direct the hips and the legs. Thank you for watching, and any observation, any question, please do let me know. Have a lovely day.